Hi everyone, welcome to Powered by Rainbows. I am of course your host, Professor Pride, and today on the show we're showing you how to clean the dishes, so let's get started.
So first off here, I organized everything into piles, and so you'll see a pile of plates, of bowls, a section for cups. Our pots and pans are all organized into different sections here, and that way it makes it 10 times easier later on. And that way when you're cleaning something, you have to clean just that one certain thing over and over again until you're done all of them. So next we're going to turn on the hot water here, making sure to use only hot water. Put a little bit of soap onto our sponge and make sure it's a little bit wet for our first dish. Then we're going to start off with the utensils here to make it easy. First off, here's a fork. So we want to make sure that the food particles are off of the area that actually goes into your mouth with the food. Make sure that's ultra clean, and then we'll wash the handle just once, just to make sure that whoever touched it last doesn't make it contaminated for the next person. And then we rinse the whole thing off, and then we're going to put that into our utensil bin to dry it off, and that way it dries off in the air. But next here we're going to wash a knife, which is a lot more dangerous, so maybe you want to have your parents do this next part. This one's a little more dangerous, but just be careful around the actual blade of the knife. Clean the blade first, and then the handle itself with soap on your sponge, and just be extra careful. I cannot recommend that enough, because you can get hurt just cleaning your knives here if they are sharp. And especially if they're dull. We're going to put them in the same drying bin, but we're going to put them blade down, and that way it's not going to hurt anyone. We're going to continue that for all of our utensils here as we go through, but as you're cleaning everything else, just make sure, again, you're making note of those knives in that bin. That way you're not cutting yourself. But everything else is pretty much the same in utensils, and we just rinse the sponge off after we're done one pile of things, and that way, or one group or genre of item that we're washing, and that way we have a fresh sponge for the next set of items. So we're going to rinse that out a couple times, and then we're going to put all of our dishes away each time here. So I generally just take all of our utensils and put them into this glass jar that my boyfriend and I have for our apartment. But if you have a drawer for your family, you can certainly put them away into that drawer, and that way they're all organized. But now they've had a couple minutes to dry off now, so now they're ready to be put away. And we're going to continue that for all of the utensils in our bin. Next, we're going to start off with the pots and pans here in this section. So on these is a little bit more difficult, but again, the same sort of premise applies here of using only hot water to wash these. That way it's a little cleaner in the end. Cold water does not wash dishes near as well. And we're going to add a little bit of soap to the middle. You don't need a lot of soap here, just a little bit of Dawn or whatever kind of brand you use for dish washing. Then I start off any sort of pots and pans in the center, because that's where most of the food particles are going to be burned on or stuck onto the pot or the pan. And I'm going to just get in there with my nails even inside of the sponge and sort of get off the harder areas there. And then I'm also washing the outside of the pot or pan and the handle. A lot of people don't wash these areas, but they are definitely needed to be washed, because as you have them in piles waiting to be washed, you're going to have them sitting on top of another pot or pan. They're going to get dirty on their own, if not on the stove itself or wherever you have them sitting in your kitchen. They're going to get dirty, and then when you put them away, you're going to put them with the bottom of one pan onto another pan. So it's going to get that pan dirty and contaminated again. For any kind of spatulas or anything like that, I generally put them against the sidewall of the sink to wash them, front and back, to get a little bit of more elbow grease on them, and then wash the handle and then rinse it off, as you can see here. But with all of these, it is very important to make sure all of the food particles are off before you put them into your secondary drying off bin. We're going to continue that with the second spatula here, but just make sure all of the food is off there before you put it into that other bin, because you don't want to have to come back later. As many times as you have to, come back to that, do it over and over and over again until it is clean. For pizza cutters here, generally I just wipe it off with some water to rinse it off to make sure all the food is generally off of it. And then I come in there with a sponge to wipe off the blade. Again, it is very dangerous to do this, so maybe a parent wants to do this part. But just be very careful of that. Then I do the body of the pizza cutter. And then on the other side here, where the blade actually connects to the handle, I just generally move the blade slowly with my one hand that's holding the utensil and wash the part that's exposed with my other hand, and then I'll rinse it all off afterwards. And again, I'll just put that into our drying bin to dry off for a couple minutes before we put it away. But again, be very, very careful of that blade because on pizza cutters, it is still sharp. For other pots and pans, it may be stuck on there, and you may have food particles that are more stuck on. For these, generally, there's a little silver piece of metal that you can see at the bottom of my sink there that catches any food particles that are extra, extra large before they go into the sink itself and get clogged in the drain. I'm using that for larger food particles here, but these aren't too large right now. Right now I'm cleaning the bottom of this pan because a lot of this food was stuck on there really, really hard. So I actually had to get in there with another utensil. I just used the back of a fork to do this, and it got it off there eventually. But just make sure you're extra careful as to not actually scratch the pan because a lot of nonstick pans can be scratched very easily. But just be careful and get that grime off of there. Or you can just leave it soaking in soapy water for a couple hours too. That generally works on getting harder areas off of pans. Either way works just fine. But if you don't want to scratch your pans, or you may not be as careful as I am, then you may want to let it soak for a couple hours first. Then again, I'm just washing with soapy water on my sponge, and just make sure that you have plenty of soap on your sponge at all times. If your sponge stops giving off that spongy white water with suds there, then you want to get more soap and rinse your sponge off again. Don't be afraid to do that as many times as you need. Don't add too much soap that you're filling the sink with soap here and wasting all your soap. But anytime you see that soap going down and you don't have enough of it, don't be afraid to go back and get more. Then we're going to rinse that pan off. And finally, we're going to dry off those pans before we continue on to the next genre or pile of plates or whatever else we have here. I generally just dry it off as we go, and that way it's all, again, organized and easier to handle. I like looking at the pile and knowing as we go through, pile by pile is getting done, and that way it's just easier for my brain to wrap my head around. Maybe that's just my OCD coming in, but it's a lot easier for me. So now we're moving on to some pots here. For these, I'm cleaning the lids for it, front and back, and then on the pots themselves, what I want to do is wash the outside of the inside of the pan first, and then move to the very bottom of that pan, because basically what happens here in any pots or for bowls, as you wash the inside of it, the food particles from the outer part, the upright part of the pot, are going to fall into the bottom of the pot, and you don't want to wash the bottom of the pot and then move your way out. It's a lot better if you work your way down inside and then wash the entire outside and that handle again before drying off all of your pots and putting them away into whatever cabins or compartments your family uses. And we're just going to be careful here of the last few dishes before we move on to our next pile, which are bowls. So for bowls, it's similar to pots here. We're going to start off with some soapy water onto our sponge and then clean the inside of the bowl first. And we're going to start off there. On the outside, I just generally move it around with my hand as I'm cleaning the outside of the inside. And then I finally clean the very bottom of the inside where all the food was sitting. And then the outside completely where, it's sitting on the table or whatever. So we're going to do that for all of our bowls here. But again, it's inside first, then outside. That's how it goes for any bowls, any pots, all that sort of stuff. That is how you clean all of your dishes here. It's a lot easier to do this in an organized fashion. Again, probably had a little bit too much soap there at that moment, but it's okay. I'd rather too much a little bit here than not have enough. Again, don't be afraid to go back in there with more elbow grease and get more food particles out there like I'm doing right now on screen. If you miss something, it's much better to grab it now rather than, next time you go to grab a bowl for cereal next morning, having food particles there left over and have to wash it all over again. It's much better to grab it right now while you are washing it and just do it a second time. It's okay to do bowls 2-3 times if you need to get little stuck on pieces off of there. Really, Again, I'd much rather see that than having leftover food particles on whatever you're going to cook next there. If you don't notice it's on there later on, or say, oh, I'll come back to that. No, just do it right now, and that way, once it's clean, it is in the drawer or the cabinet in your kitchen. So we're going to do the final bowl here in our pile, and then we'll move on to drying them off before putting them away here. Generally speaking, as you're drying off the dishes here, they do dry off as you're doing other bowls in that pile, and so you'll notice as you get to the final bowls or something that they're pretty dry already. You don't need to really dry them off with a towel too much, but I just like to give them a once-over before putting them away, just so they don't get moldy on the cabinet that you have them sitting in for however long. Now we're going to move on to the mugs and the cups section of the video and our piles. Like I said, it's much better to have these organized to begin with. That way, it's a lot easier to wrap your head around, and that way you can look back and go, wow, look at all I accomplished today, or look back and see, look at all the things that I accomplished already, and this is how many piles I have left. So on cups, I rinse them out first with a little bit of hot water, then I wash the outside of the cup first, and then the handle, and then finally move from the top of the cup down into the center of the cup, and finally at the very bottom, I'm twisting my hands so that way I grab all of the leftover liquid or whatever cooked on liquid that's dried up in there. I'm getting that all on the bottom of the cup there. With cups, it's very important to make sure you're washing, especially the outer ring of the outside where your lips would actually sip on whatever cup it is, and also the entire inside to make sure whatever liquid was in there is completely out of there and it's cleaned off. And then once we rinse it off, I'm rinsing off the outside first. That way our hands are cleaner as we're moving it around. And then I simply twist the cup on in my hands as I'm cleaning the inside, and I let the cup fill up a little bit with water before I pour it out, and I'm twisting it still, and I'm twisting it while the water is still filling the inside. Then I clean it out again, and so on and so forth until the entire cup is clean. Make sure on cups especially here, the water runs completely clear as it's coming out of the cup. Otherwise, you do not have all of the soap out of that cup. Don't put a cup back into your cabinet that still has any kind of soapy water or any soap residue in it. You just want to make sure all of that soap is out of there, because otherwise you'll be tasting a poisonous, not to mention a very bad tasting liquid, whatever you're drinking next. It's going to contaminate it. So as you see here, I'm just slowly rinsing the inside of that cup by twisting the cup in my hands. And then we're going to continue for all of the mugs that we have here. There's going to be quite a bit of mugs because you drink a lot throughout the day, and you should be drinking a lot. By the way, if you haven't already, get your daily dose of water. Drink your water today, and that way you remain healthy and hydrated. But then we're going to continue with our final 2 cups here and wash the outside, the handle, then move to the lip area of where your lips would touch the cup, and then move inward to the very bottom, making sure to get the leftover residue of any liquid in there. And like I said, don't be afraid to go back in there with a sponge if you miss something. If you notice there's still some residue of coffee or whatever, coffee especially is hard to get out of mugs or cups, so don't be afraid to go out there and bring back in the sponge to get any leftover residue. And this is our final mug of the day. So we're going to quickly get the inside of that mug and rinse it off. Again, the bottom, the sides, and then finally the inside, rinsing that out until it runs clear. And finally, we're going to put those away and get to our Tupperware section. So on these, I want to rinse it out with hot water first. Then I'll clean the insides first. Again, the outer ring first, and then the very, very bottom of the Tupperware, and then the outside of the Tupperware. And I'll rinse all of that off. Again, make sure that there's no leftover soap residue in that Tupperware before we put it in the dry pile. And then the lid, I'll clean both sides of that with soap and water on our sponge. Then I'm moving on here to a cutting board. Now, it's very important on cutting boards to get every single inch of this, because you don't know where you're going to cut the next piece of food on. I generally, even though this cutting board is bigger than the sink itself, as you notice here, I'm moving it in such a way that the water is staying inside of the sink itself, making sure not to aim it in a direction that it's going to have the water fall out of the sink. On those items, you have to plan where the water is going to go before rinsing it off. I'm just doing a small dish here, but on those larger items, it gets a lot more dangerous. So then we're going to put those away here quickly and dry them off. Again, as we're going through here, as you can see, I'm washing, then drying, and then putting them away right away because I want to make room for the next batch, the next pile of things that I'm going to be doing. And now as we move on here to the final little bit of that pile, again, rinsing that off and adding more soap. We're going to move on to the plates. For plates especially, make sure you have a fresh set of soap on your sponge. We're going to be washing the top of the plate first, where you're actually eating off of. Wash that outer edge of the plate where the little sides come up. Make sure you're washing that especially, and then move towards the center of the plate where the bulk of the food was, and then wash the outside where the plate is sitting on the table, on the bottom of the plate per se. We're going to be washing basically the top and then the bottom on all of these plates. Just make sure all of that food residue is off of there. Don't be afraid to get back in with another round and a little more elbow grease. Don't be afraid to do that. If you rinse it off and you realize there's still food on it, don't be afraid to get that sponge again and get back in there. But on these, they were pretty easy to do. So smaller plates are generally pretty easy to do. It's the larger plates that generally have the more stuck-on food onto the plates themselves. And we got the larger plates right here. So on the larger plates especially, I try to rinse them off first before trying to wash them with my sponge, just to make sure that the bulk of the food gets off there first. Again, making sure that little drain is in my sink to get any large food particles before they get into the actual drain and clog my drain up. So here, again, there wasn't enough soap on my sponge, so I'm adding more soap before continuing the rest of the plates. And on these, I'm again washing the bottom just as heavily as the top because, again, I mean, if you just see how they're piled there in our piles from before, they're one on top of each other. So the bottom of one got dirty from the top of the other plate that it was sitting on. And when you put them away at the end of washing them here and drying them, you're going to be putting them, stacking them in the same sort of piles. So that bottom is going to touch the next plate's top and contaminate it, even though you just washed it. So you'll make sure to wash both the top and the bottom of each and every plate. So we're going to continue that for all of our plates here, and just making sure that it's all clean and fancy for the next meal that we're going to have on these plates. Now these are stone plates, I should note that, so they're a little better in the microwave and a little heavier in general, so when you're moving them around, they're not cracking as often and they last a lot longer. But that's just my boyfriend saying hi to me on his lunch break from work. But so everyone say hi to Michael out there. But on these plates, it's just as easy as cleaning any other kind of porcelain plates or whatever you have. The more porcelain or whatever other kind of plates you have, they might be more delicate, so you might want to take it a little bit easier on them. But for these stone plates, you can use a little bit of elbow grease to get those hard stains on there off, and it's no problem at all. So the final plate here before we go drying them all off and putting them away, and again just going on the top outer edge towards the center, and then the outer edge of the outside, and then finally the bottom before circling the dish. I actually circle the dish there on every plate to make sure that I'm rinsing the entire plate off, top and bottom. You're going to notice that little move. You can steal that move if you want. It works really great to make sure that all of the plate is covered with water and it's running clear water from it before I put it in my drying rack and put it away for the day. And once all our plates are put away here in a fancy little order, I have my cabinets right above the sink, so it's a lot easier to put them away. On this, for any kind of pan that you have for your oven, a lot of times things get stuck on them a lot easier than everything else, but the same premise sort of applies here, where we cover the top of the pan first. This is a cooking sheet for like cookies or chicken or whatever kind of stuff you're making. And in the oven, this is made for that. So I want to make sure that the top is clean first, and then I move on to the bottom of the pan. This one isn't too dirty, but other pans that we're going to do in a second are very dirty, and a lot of things are cooked on there in the oven. You're going to notice on cooking sheets especially, and baking sheets, things get stuck on these very easily, so you might have to use a little bit of elbow grease with your sponge on a harder sponge, a rougher sponge, I should say, or you can use a back of a fork or another utensil to scrape that off. Again, being very delicate, not to actually scratch the pan, but just get whatever's stuck on there off. Or you can also just leave a pan for a couple hours with soapy water soaking for a couple hours, and that should work just fine as well. This is all of our pans that we're having to wash today. Again, you'll notice this is really stuck on there, so I had to get in there with the back of a fork to get it all off, and then I cleaned the fork one more time before putting it back away. And then I wash the back of the pan. This pan is bigger than the sink itself, so again, just be careful not to splash any water onto yourself or outside of the sink itself. Make sure that wherever the water is going to go, it's going into one of the two bins of your sink, or however big your sink is. At the very end of washing all of our dishes and putting them all away, I generally grab a paper towel, and then I wash the side of the sink where all of my dirty dishes were sitting. Sometimes there's some splash water there that you want to get off, and sometimes there's just some food particles left there from whatever dirty dishes you had, and I'm making sure all of that is cleaned off and the sink is cleaned for the next use, and it looks all pretty. Then I'm grabbing some more paper towels, and finally cleaning the area that my dirty dishes were all sitting on when they were in the piles there. And that way my entire kitchen is clean for the next time my boyfriend and I want to make dinner.
Anyway, that is all for today. Thank you so much for watching. If you like our episodes on home economics, then check out this playlist right here. And if you like our episodes in LGBTQ education, then please subscribe to our channel for more episodes every single week. As always, I'm your host, Professor Pride. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great day, everyone, and bye for now.